After years of planning and at a cost of over $5 million, the new Robert W. Quinlan Community Center is slated to open April 2nd in the city of Cupertino. Hi, I'm Susan Robinson. Today we'll find out the facts behind this spectacular new facility as we join City of Cupertino Parks and Recreation Director Steve Dowling next on Take 53.
Tell me, what is in? Everybody, I want to know. In, yeah. Oh, what is in? Ooh, yeah. What is in? Everybody, tell me, I got to know. What is in? What's in?
Six months ago, this 12-year-old thought he was just out having a little fun. Where do you go before things get out of hand? He got help at a youth center. They got help from the United Way. All because the United Way got help from you. The United Way. It brings out the best in all of us.
Welcome to Take 53. Today our focus is on the part the new community center will play in the city of Cupertino. Joining me is City of Cupertino Parks and Recreation Director Steve Dowling. Steve, thanks for joining me on Take 53 today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
First of all, do all cities have some type of community center?
Yes, nearly every city in the San Francisco Bay Area has some form of a community center. So from that perspective, Cupertino is one of the last to get such a facility.
It was. How long has this been in the planning to get a facility?
A very long time. Actually, the original master plan for Memorial Park, prepared in the mid-70s, identified a community center for Memorial Park. And then as the phases of the park evolved, funding became an issue, and it was clear that we weren't not going to be able to afford a community center. So the idea was dropped, and then in the early 80s, Councilmember Plungy proposed the concept of combining some sort of recreational center or traditional community center with perhaps some social service aspects as well. So we spent the 80s identifying a number of alternatives and options for a community center for Cupertino.
That's great. So it's basically, this project has been coming along since the 70s. It's taken about 20 years to fulfill.
That's correct. We've taken our time, but we think we've done it right.
That's great. So how was this particular location selected, and out of a field of how many?
Okay, I'll go back to the history of the 80s. There was a committee formed in the early 80s to do that very thing, identify a potential location for a community center. And at that time, there were a number of elementary schools closing, so the focus of the committee was perhaps one of these closing elementary schools would lend itself to conversion to a community center. So with that as a focus, this original committee spent about 2 years reviewing and investigating the feasibility of a community center at a number of closed elementary sites. That committee's final recommendation was that of all the available elementary schools, the Jollyman School would have made the most likely transition to a community center. So that committee made that recommendation to City Council.
I see.
Then City Council took that information and some initial studies were done, and we discovered that by the time we renovated and made the changes to that site to a community center, it would be cheaper to build from the ground up, a brand new building. So another committee was formed to talk about the kinds of locations that make sense, and there were a number of city-owned properties that were discussed. The library field here, for example, the Monte Vista site out on the far west side of town, and of course the 7 acres at Memorial Park. And it was rather obvious to that committee that that final 7 acres of Memorial made the most sense for a community center.
I see. So that's how you ended up there.
That's right.
Now, it is called a community center. Does that mean that everyone will have access to it?
Oh, certainly. the recreation operation, all of our programs are open to the public. We have a couple other special uses. Cupertino Historical Society will have their first home in our building, and that is accessible to the public. And then we have a number of social service activities. For example, Cupertino Community Services will have offices and be able to provide some services right on site, and that's available to anyone. So it's truly a public building.
It sounds like it. You mentioned that the Cupertino Historical Society will be in the facility, as well as the community services. Now, how did these end up tied into our facility? In other words, who approached who?
Okay. Well, more history. Let's take the Historical Society first. They have been looking for a site since I've seen memos dating back to 1965. And we, with that organization, went through a number of iterations about what makes a likely location. There was a period of time when we thought maybe the McClellan Ranch House would be suitable for their needs. There are some problems with access there and not being on a major thoroughfare. We looked at a number of other alternatives, the old Cali House being one. There was a residence that sat on the Jollyman property, and that was designated as the potential site for a while. And this process and various committees extended over a period of about a decade. And the society got to the point that they felt their first choice was always Memorial Park, because that's where the foot traffic is, that's where the focus of the community in terms of weekend usage was, and they really wanted to be in that setting. So at the same time this sentiment was being expressed by the Historical Society, there was a committee that was conducting the research on the programs of our new building. So the two got together and said, why don't we put the Historical Museum in the community center? And that took place in about 1985. So that's how the Historical Society ended up there. CCS ended up there. Again, this was an idea initiated by John Plungy in the early 80s, that let's go beyond just providing recreation services. Let's have a place where people can come and receive social services as well. So CCS was one of the first agencies identified as a likely possibility.
I see. So will the hours of the other activities there, such as the Historical Society, will their hours be the same as the center as a whole?
Somewhat. The recreation services will operate principally Monday through Saturday, and then Monday through Thursday evenings. The Historical Museum will be open primarily on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, and then through the week for special school tours. CCS is principally an office function, and they'll be open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So they're
That's
really
great.
complementary time frames.
So you have many different activities located in
certainly.
the center. That's great. We need to take a break. But when we return, we'll find out some more about the style of the new community center that will make it not only beautiful, but unique.
Plant a tree, now is the time to recognize a tree for all that it is worth. Plant a tree for your tomorrow. It's your tree that clears the air. Plant a tree, trees for America. Plant a tree today for all the world to share.
Yo, Alf here. Apparently some chowderheads out there aren't taking care of this planet. They're messing up public lands. They're littering the beaches and vandalizing the parks. Look, folks, public lands are not like pizzas. You just can't pick up the phone and order more. So let's take care of our land. Let's save the planet. Call me and promise you'll help. I'll send you a bunch of neat stuff. It's my way of saying thanks. It's an acknowledgement of your concern. It's a bribe.
And we're back on Take 53. I'm Susan Robinson, here with Parks and Recreation Director Steve Dowling. Moving a little bit more into the architecture of the building, what style will comprise the center?
Style. I'm grinning because it's really a blend of many different styles. The architect, Steinberg Group, wanted to blend, they wanted to start with a traditional classical look, but they had this historically Spanish reference of De Anza College and our senior center. So we've added kind of the Spanish element to it. And then once you get inside, it tends to be very modern in layout. So it's really a blend of those three elements.
How concerned were you in creating this look, this blend, with getting a look that was not only contemporary but lasting as well? Was that a hard thing to accomplish?
It was difficult, and we had quite a bit of dialogue about not going so far in any direction that the building would look dated sooner than we wanted. And I think that Steinberg Group did a good job in blending those elements so that we're going to not look out of place for a while. Clearly, it's a very dramatic building to look at, but we think that, for example, the colonnades that traditional classical look will be with us for a while. So.
I know the entrance is spectacular. It's a sight to see. Can you tell us a little bit about how that entrance came about?
As a matter of fact, a lot of dialogue in the committee programming process centered around the entrance. What we wanted to do was not play down the park that sits behind the community center. We wanted people, as they approach the building, to be able to see through the building and into the park. So with that as a program element, what we've ended up with is you have the colonnade coming out to kind of invite you in, and the lobby provides a lot of glass, a lot of natural light. Not only is there 2 stories of glass, but there's a overhead. You have some light, natural light coming through. And it's very narrow in depth so that you very quickly move inside the building, but you get a nice vista into the park as well. So that was what we tried to do, and as you mentioned, I think it's a pretty strong statement.
It is. It's beautiful. As far as the center as a whole, how many rooms are there, and do you have one that's a favorite?
There's 8 program, assembly, or meeting rooms, and there is about another 7 to 8 office spaces, and then with all of the additional storage. My favorite room would certainly be the multi-purpose room, because here again we wanted to, as a committee, establish a room that made a strong statement, that was functional, that was very appealing to be in, that brought the outside indoors, so to speak. So what we ended up with was a very nice, large, 4,400 square feet assembly area. Now that's my favorite room, but there's a room that is a mirror image of that on the other end of the building, and they both kind of come out and focus on one another. It's essentially a smaller version of the multipurpose room, and we're going to call it the social room. Very light, a lot of natural light. It's a unique shape. It has bay windows on one end and very high ceilings. Very, very pleasant, positive place to be. So that's a close second.
Sounds great. You mentioned the multi-purpose room. On the tour, I noticed that the kitchen and the multi-purpose room are very much geared towards banquets and parties. Does the city expect to bring in a lot of income through renting those out for parties, and how much do you expect to get into the wedding business?
Not interested at all in getting into the wedding business. Certainly we will provide space for wedding receptions, and that was one of the elements of our program. The reason that room took the shape that it did is that in Cupertino there is not a meeting place for that size group where you can serve a banquet. And we'll be one of the first facilities in town where you can serve 300 banquet style and have a kitchen facility that can match that. So that was our real intent, and you asked if it was going to generate a lot of revenue. Yes, there will be revenue generated, but making money on that room was not our fundamental intent. But there's no doubt in our mind, based upon the phone calls that are coming in already, that it's going to be in heavy demand.
I see. I noticed a special feature that you mentioned earlier about that room is that there's a noise level monitor. How does that work?
Well, we're going to find out how that works. How it's supposed to work is, in response to some concerns expressed by adjacent residents and their fear that private parties would get too noisy, particularly bands, there is a mechanism in the multipurpose room whereby if the decibel level of the band exceeds a certain level, then the power to the band shuts off for a period of 3 minutes. So it's a rather definitive way to control how loud the band is. The old system of going up and asking the band to turn it down just doesn't work, so we're going to use a little technology.
I see. So there will definitely be a noise control there.
Yes.
Also, I know another concern is the safety of the building. How safe is it for such things as earthquakes, since that's on all of our minds?
Well, certainly it was built to the most recent Uniform Building Code, and there's quite a bit of requirements about seismic activity, but we've been told by the engineers that the building could roll over 3 times and still stand up, so we're confident that it's safe.
Does sound safe. We've really focused on the inside of the building. What about the exterior? I hear it's just as beautiful. Can you tell us about the exterior of the building?
The site is a 7-acre site, and it is the final phase of development of Memorial Park, and the community center sits on the piece closest to Dowling Road. What we wanted to do was provide a lot of green space between the back side of the building and the existing park. So there is a large turf area that is just green grass. Will not be used for any specific dedicated activity. Some walkways that run down both sides of it, and at the far end, near the existing park, we have a group picnic area for 100. So the intent was to provide enough open space between the two facilities to give that sense of space.
So when you say picnic areas, all that grass area and things, will there be barbecues there? Or?
No, as a matter of fact, there will be no improved amenities such as that. Our intent is to provide just visual relief. Now, certainly, we're not going to object to folks gathering in that turf and playing frisbee or flying a kite. That's the very thing we want to encourage. But there won't be, in that space between the two, picnic tables or picnic barbecues or any apparatus. It's just visual relief.
Great. Okay, well, we need to take a break. But when we return, we'll find out more about the new community center and what type of neighbor it promises to be.
You struggle to keep going, trying to escape it. But if you think there's no way out, you're living in a private nightmare of your own creation. That's what happens when you put off doing your taxes to the last minute. Wake up and do something about it. File now, file accurately, and make your taxes less taxing.
Crashing on through, busting our heads just for you.
My name is Vince. This job makes me sore. If you'd buckle up, I wouldn't do it no more.
They call me Larry. I'm a dummy too. When you don't buckle up, the dummy is you. Buckle that belt.
These are professional dummies. Do not attempt this at home.
Buckle that belt.
Got one thing to say, and we know we're not wrong. When you go for a ride, put your safety belt on.
And we're back on Take 53 talking with City of Cupertino Parks and Recreation Director Steve Dowling. Steve, how will the center fit in with the neighboring area and with the Memorial Park, which is right next door?
Well, the program committee from the beginning wanted the community center to integrate with the existing Memorial Park. And I think what you can see is we've ended up with 2 anchor facilities at each end of the park. You have the senior center at one end and the community center on the other. Memorial Park is the designated community center for the community, designated by the general plan. And by that definition, most of the very active spaces should be focused in that area. So that's another reason why the community center ended up at that site. We wanted to keep Memorial Park as the identified community park and minimize some of the active spaces from intruding into our neighborhood park system. So basically what we have is Memorial Park provides the senior center, the ball field, tennis courts, amphitheater, and then in the new section a group picnic area for 100 and the community center, which will meet, as we've talked about earlier, just the whole gamut of recreational and social needs. So that's what we've tried to do, is blend the existing with this new amenity.
I see. I know that the city is in negotiations to purchase the De Anza Racket Club, if I understand that correctly. Now, how will this new facility fit in with the community center? Is that going to be an extension of the facility, or will that be completely separate?
Separate, a little different focus. Here again, we're keeping our community activity at Memorial Park. And what conceptually we're thinking of with the acquisition of the Racket Club goes far beyond tennis. What we envision is a facility that might more appropriately be called a multi-use sports complex. For example, certainly we would keep the tennis function because those courts are, they're beautiful courts and they're lit and they're in good shape. But more than likely we would not keep all of them. What we would like to see there, if possible, if space and funding allow, is to provide other sports activities. For example, this community could use a recreational gymnasium. In addition to that, this community could use a recreational public pool. And it might be possible to add those two ingredients to that present De Anza Racket Club complex and end up with a very attractive sports center. And ultimately, I think you can see from all of that Memorial Park would be essentially a showcase of recreational facilities for the whole South Bay because it's all there.
I see. So it sounds like a perfect addition. The swimming and those types of things will be at the De Anza Racket Club facility, and the other things, the crafts and those things, will be at the community center.
That's correct. It's a different kind of use than the community center.
I see. It sounds great. Also, since most all of the Parks and Rec Department is moving over to the new center, what's going to happen to the Monte Vista Rec Center?
Monte Vista Rec Center, which has served us well this past decade, by the way, that was at one time that was considered the community center site. And you're right, we'll be moving all of our recreation classes out of there. What we envision for Monte Vista is to dedicate that to our co-sponsored clubs. Our co-sponsored clubs have real difficult time finding places to meet and conduct activities, particularly square dancing. So what we would like to do at Monte Vista is convert that space to meet the needs of square dance clubs, judo clubs, some of our Las Madres social groups, provide a general meeting space that all of those groups can use and dedicate that to them because their uses tend to be more specific.
Okay, that sounds really good. Moving into the neighbor issue, the good neighbor issue, how sensitive has the city been to the concerns and the needs of the residents on the perimeter of the new community center?
A lot of effort, both on our part and the residents' part, went into establishing some understanding about how this building would evolve. And I think that an example of that was that at one point members of the neighborhood from both sides of the site were participants in the planning committee. We reached a point where it became apparent to us that we really couldn't effectively address the needs of the residents without including them in the planning process. So as an outcome of that, there were a number of special features designed into the building that addressed, we feel, the concerns of the immediate residents. And I think they were very legitimate concerns. We have to remember that this was an orchard, a very passive setting, and we were converting it to a high-use facility. So there were bound to be concerns around traffic and noise and overflow of participants into their residences. So some things that we did inside the building to mitigate those were what we talked about a moment ago, the noise device in the multipurpose room. The very layout of the multipurpose room was a series of compromises about which way to face it so as to minimize noise impacts on the residents. In that room also there's another feature. We don't have any doors that will open directly into the airspace of the residents. That's the primary concern, that you can provide a room that doesn't have much noise overflow, but the minute you open the doors, the sound of the band and the people goes just like a tunnel. So you can't leave or exit that multipurpose room without going through a portico. You go through one set of doors and then to the outside. And there was a number of other things that were done on the site to try and mitigate the concerns of the residents. We tried to bring all the parking and the access to the building as close to Stelling as possible so that you don't get traffic going down Alves and Christensen any more than necessary. So in response to your question, it was It required a lot of discussion and comment from both sides to try and end up with a building that was responsive to our needs and their concerns.
I see. It seems you have really addressed a lot of their concerns. Also, now to get into an exciting fact here, when is the grand opening of the center?
We have a ceremony planned for the last weekend in March. There will be a ceremony Friday night on March 30th, community banquet, and then on Saturday will be the more traditional dedication ceremony. We envision something happening between 11 and 3. We'll probably unveil a plaque. We're talking about planting a tree in memory of the orchard. We're talking about some other special things to make that day memorable. In addition to that, we plan lots of entertainment and food and exhibits. We'll probably have some of our classes going on so people can get a feel for the kinds of things that will be there. The museum folks will be there running tours, and CCS will be there to answer questions. So it's those 2 days we think will be very festive and very fun. We open our doors to the public for business the following Monday, April 2nd.
I see. So the grand opening, did you say it's going to be a 3-day long event or a two-day long event?
It was going to be a 3-day long event. However, the drought situation has precluded us from planting the turf in the space between. And the 3rd day was going to be a community picnic in the park.
Oh.
But you just can't do that in dirt. So we'll hold that off for another time.
I see. So there is no park there yet, which is why we're having a 2-day event instead of a 3-day.
All of the irrigation systems are put in, and we're going to put a lot of the trees in, but the turf will not go in because of the drought situation. Okay,
well, our time's up. It sounds wonderful. I hope I'll be there, and we know that you'll be there at the grand opening, and hopefully the community will be there as well. Everyone's invited, right?
Absolutely. And there'll be more about this in the upcoming issue of the Cupertino Scene.
Great. Thanks so much for joining me on Take 53 so we can all find out about our new center.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us on Take 53.